Hi, I'm Miss Robin. I'm so glad you're back with me today for another biography break. This time, we have a really interesting story about someone that you already probably know something about, Jackie Robinson. But this takes place when Jackie Robinson was in the Army. This was something new. I never knew about this, and I was very excited when I read this book and learned some more history. It's called The United States versus Jackie Robinson. It's up for your vote for the Arkansas Diamond Award. That is, if you're in kindergarten, first, second, or third grade in the state of Arkansas. The United States versus Jackie Robinson. Written by Sudipta Bardhan-Quallen, illustrated by R. Gregory Christie, and published by Balzer Bray, and we're glad that they're letting us read it to you today. Long before anyone had heard of Rosa Parks, a guy named Jack refused to move to the back of the bus. And like Rosa, Jack made history too. Jack Robinson grew up in Pasadena, California, at a time when public pools were open to black children only once a week, then drained immediately afterward and refilled with fresh water for the white children who swam the rest of the time. Segregation was the reality of American life. Most white people would not share schools, restaurants, bathrooms, water fountains, or seating areas with black people. White lawmakers in the South actually passed laws requiring black people to stay away from places that were labeled whites only. As the only black family on their street, the Robinsons were not welcomed by their white neighbors. Some even started a petition to get the Robinsons to leave. But Jack's mother, Mally, wouldn't go. She made it clear to any and all that she was not afraid and she wouldn't allow anyone to treat her family badly. Mally taught her children to stand up for what was right, even when that was difficult to do. Jack learned those lessons well. Even as a child, Jack was good at sports. So much so that the kids at school would bribe him with treats from their lunches if he played for their team. As he grew up, his name and athletic feats were regularly in the newspaper. Jack and Mally dreamed that his talent would unlock doors for him, especially to college. When the University of California, Los Angeles, UCLA, recruited Jack to play for them, that dream came true. Jack became one of the most successful college athletes in the country. He won games, he broke records, he sealed championships. But a lot of people still saw him only as a black man. On the football field, opponents would go out of their way to hit him, whether he had the ball or not. Even Jack's own teammates once used practice as an excuse to tackle him so hard that they severely sprained his knee. Black athletes weren't supposed to argue with white coaches, referees, or players. They were supposed to feel lucky that UCLA let them play at all. But Jack never forgot his mother's lessons. On and off the field, Jack wouldn't back down to anyone who treated him unfairly. Jack became the first person in UCLA history to earn varsity letters in 4 different sports: football, basketball, baseball, and track. But that didn't mean he could start dreaming about a career in sports after college. There was a line that had to be crossed to play on a professional team: the color line. White athletes could be professionals, but no major team would hire a black player. Jack couldn't bear to pursue a dream that would never come true, so he left college without graduating and looked to get a job. Not long after, Pearl Harbor was attacked and the United States entered World War II. Americans from all walks of life, including Jack Robinson, answered their nation's call to defend freedom around the globe. In the Army, Jack experienced segregation on a daily basis. On the base, there were separate places for black soldiers to sit and segregated barracks for them to live in. But for a long time, sports had been a place where Jack had been able to excel regardless of the color of his skin. So one day, he tried to join the Fort Riley baseball team. When Jack arrived at the field, players were already practicing. Jack introduced himself to the white officer in charge as a potential recruit. The officer looked Jack over. He shook his head, then he said, "You'd have to play for the colored team." Except there was no colored team. Jack hadn't realized Army sports would have a color line too, or that the Fort Riley team wouldn't see him as just another baseball player. They only saw a black man. Jack watched practice for a while, his face flushed with anger. Then he turned and walked away. But he didn't forget. Soon afterward, a colonel asked Jack to play football for the base. Jack refused. The colonel sternly reminded Jack that he could be commanded to play. "Yes," Jack replied, "but he couldn't be commanded to play well." "You wouldn't want me playing on your team," he said, knowing my heart wasn't in it. Jack never took a pitch or a snap for the Army. In May 1944, the Army issued an order forbidding segregation on military posts and buses. To black soldiers like Jack, this was an important change. Even though segregation was found everywhere in America, from then on it was supposed to be different in the Army. When Jack was on Army property, he should have been free to go where he wanted. But just because the Army gave an order didn't mean that everyone respected it. Jack would soon learn that firsthand. On July 6th, at Fort Hood in Texas, Jack sat down in a seat in the middle of an Army bus. He didn't notice other passengers staring at him or the driver telling him to go to the back. The longer Jack ignored the driver, the more the man fumed. He stopped the bus and walked down the aisle. He balled his fist and said, "Will you move to the back?" Jack knew his rights. He didn't argue, but he didn't get up either. The driver glared. He warned Jack that there was trouble coming. Within moments of the bus arriving at Jack's stop, a crowd of angry white people surrounded Jack, yelling at him to know his place, calling him names. The crowd didn't see an officer in the United States Army. They only saw a black man. When the military police arrived, they didn't detain any of the white people who had been shouting and making threats. They didn't discipline the bus driver for trying to segregate an Army bus after the Army had forbidden it. Instead, they decided that Jack Robinson was the one who was wrong. Jack couldn't believe it. He had been charged with 2 crimes. This wasn't a misunderstanding or a mistake. Jack would be taken to trial before a military court called a court-martial. If he was found guilty, his Army career would be over. He could go to jail. Jack knew the court-martial wouldn't have happened if he had just moved to the back of the bus. He worried how this would affect his reputation and integrity, but Jack also knew he had done the right thing. Jack remembered what his mother taught him. He was ready for this. On August 2nd, 1944, the case of United States versus Second Lieutenant Jack R. Robinson began. The prosecution witnesses described a defiant soldier who ignored a direct order and was disrespectful to a senior officer. Jack had no choice but to listen while people lied about him. But when he took the stand, he told the truth with dignity. He described how the bus driver had ordered him to the back of the bus, how soldiers ranked beneath him treated him like a criminal instead of an officer. He testified that the MP captain never gave him any orders, that he hadn't done anything wrong. Then Jack waited for the real story to come out. And soon the truth did emerge. Several of Jack's commanding officers testified about his excellent character and leadership skills. Some prosecution witnesses admitted that Jack had never ignored any orders because he was never given any orders. Others revealed that Jack had been called names and insulted because of his race. After 5 hours of testimony, it was clear to the court that Jack had been charged only because of the color of his skin. The verdict was delivered, not guilty. Jack had fought for what he knew was right. He had stood up to prejudice and discrimination and exercised his right to sit wherever he wanted on a bus. He was one of the first Black Americans to challenge a segregation law in court, and he won. Jack made history that day, but it wasn't the last time Jack would do that. After the trial, Jack asked to leave the Army. He took a job in Kansas City, and then another in Montreal. And in 1947, Jack went to work in Brooklyn, New York. But at all those jobs, most people didn't call him Jack anymore. They called him Jackie Robinson. That job he took in Kansas City was to play baseball for a Negro League team called the Monarchs. The job in Montreal was to play for a minor league team called the Royals. And that job in Brooklyn was to play first base for the Brooklyn Dodgers. On April 15, 1947, Jack broke the color line in professional baseball. Once again, he had to fight for what was right with patience and grace in the face of racism and hatred. And once again, he made history. By then, Jack had plenty of practice doing both of those things. The back of this book shows the timeline of Jack's life. It's really interesting. Quite an amazing story. The United States versus Jackie Robinson. It's a pretty great book about a pretty great person that did some pretty great things. Is it going to get your vote for the Arkansas Diamond Primary Book Award? I can't wait to find out. Until then, I'll see you next time for another biography break.